and put them on paper for further review. Does that make sense?
Yes, I like Matt's idea of a few examples, honestly, too, so that people understand,
Sure.
I think that's helpful to the, to common people who are listening in on this conversation. What does it mean? You go out and buy a heat pump and you're buying for it, all yourself. What does it mean? Paying for it all yourself. I think those are important examples of what we're talking about.
Matt, is that an okay ambition for today's meeting?
It is, and I didn't want to, and thank you for Liz for pointing out there might be a fourth bucket. I'm not suggesting there's only three. There might actually be a fifth bucket after listening to you talk, for looking at because the entity that delivers natural gas and renewable natural gas operates under different circumstances than the entities times 200 that could deliver a fuel, a liquid fuel or gaseous fuel from a truck.
Right, a mixed fuel, perhaps like a biofuel or some other fuel, right? If you're intentionally buying that.
Right. So
that's a little different than a pipeline that might have 10% renewable natural gas in it because that's their goal for the year.
Well, I was referring more to the ability for a natural gas utility to both procure the renewable natural gas and then retail it, where they're vertically integrated, versus the unregulated heating fuels industry, in which the fuel that's sold by the obligated party could be several steps upstream and have no idea who the customer is. Right. That's going to happen. So I think, I'm sure Vermont Gas has their opinions on how that should happen. I'm not an expert on that part of it, but I certainly have input on how the unregulated, the propane, heating oil, kerosene are distributed, and how it would be nearly impossible, in my opinion, for the same methodology for credit ownership that we have in equipment to then be transposed to delivered fuels.
And I would add to this, and I assume this is in the back of your mind, Matt, also the issue that Ken raises, differentiating, and this would occur in at least three of the buckets we're talking about, differentiating between actions taken by obligated parties or actions that obligated parties will want to either they generate credits with or buy credits as a consequence of. And those actions that are taken, which produce credits that are themselves driven by other PUC or governmental programs.
Yes.
And that's Ken's point. And we'll talk.
Yes. I did not mean to give that short shrift. That is.
Oh, I know you did. No, I know. So how do you want to begin? You want to start with installed measures, or how do you want to go?
I think so. I think installed measures is not as complicated as some of the other ones. Maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem as complicated.
I have a procedural question here.
Sure.
So the three of us are in the tag.
And
then we have third parties here with us. Are we having a conversation amongst ourselves and asking for comment? What are we doing here? I'm sorry. I should know the protocol.
Well, we're having a conversation amongst ourselves. The breakout group is for the tag members to, roll up our sleeves. Greg Morse of VGS is a member of the tag. So
are they?
No, they're not. Forgive me. When I said that, I realized that's right. They're not. So, for now, we will, it'll just be amongst the three of us. And we can, if we wish, take public comment here in the tag, in the breakout group if we want. And if we have time to, which is.
I think there's value. I think just seeing the people, I think there's value in asking them to comment. They've been here, but I think there's an order, a process would be good. So let's have this conversation and then give an opportunity for those that are listening in to react to our conversations or offer up something else. That's my preference. Is that okay with you, Liz?
I agree. I agree. Let's see. Let's aim at least for, say, 11:40 to have public comment
Okay,
if we haven't begun it before then.
Right, or do we want, because there's 4 questions here, do we want comment after each question? I'm just asking, or do you want to wait till the end, till
yeah,
we're
let
done?
them take notes.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
But Henry, as a member of the Department of Public Service, has a question. So in that regard, yes, Henry.
Yeah, I should just say I'm sitting in on behalf of the department today, so I may have input beyond what the opportunity for the public is at the end of each discussion, so I may chime in if that's all right.
Well, and we've got Dave Westman, who was functioning in the same way from VEIC. So raise your hand if you at the appropriate time.
So just for clarity, and Rick, this is just procedural. So if Matt had someone that he wanted to put in the other committee working group, he could?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good to know.
I fired up the cloning machine and we should have
Yeah,
that.
well, I just didn't know, how that works.
Yeah. No. Go back to the statute. Members of the TAG are free to bring in others
Any-
from their organizations,
Right,
experts on
okay.
their behalf.
Okay,
They don't get to vote, and so that was
but they get to give opinions. Okay,
they get to weigh in appropriately.
All right,
yeah.
so perhaps we should start with the 4 questions and then maybe we can tie in as we discuss the comments that from Ken from Diversified and from, although you haven't seen the Diversified comments, and from Efficiency Vermont.
Great.
So the first one is whether a different methodology should be applied to pipeline renewable natural gas deliveries. And I would add to that comment whether a different methodology should be applied to deliverable fuels. I mean, how would you describe it? Unregulated, non-pipeline fuel deliveries. That's clunky. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, but I think a different methodology is needed for the heating oil, propane, and kerosene deliveries, which have an opportunity to sell a lower carbon fuel, but don't have the vertical integration that a utility naturally does under regulation by the PUC, because of the challenge of establishing credit ownership with the end user for the deliverable fuels. When there are multiple stops and uncertain or undetermined, every delivery of a renewable liquid fuel will follow a quite different pathway, could follow a different pathway depending on the customer, depending on the fuel supplier, depending on the wholesaler, depending on the geography, versus how it exists for a pipeline in which is highly regulated and by the PUC already. So I would say yes, a different methodology for the delivered fuels, depending on what they are. What
so Matt, on page 2, on page 2, under, their comments, is that what because they do break it out there, right? If a customer opts for delivered measure voluntary purchase of renewable natural gas or higher biofuel blends, the customer owns the credit.
Yeah, so I would say that is impossible, and that I would urge the PUC to not. I'm not making a judgment on pipeline gas here. I'm just saying for delivered fuel products, if the decision made to lower the obligation by reducing the carbon intensity of the fuel is made upstream at a wholesale distributor, they have no way of knowing if Matt Coda at his home is getting that product, because they're selling that product in a 10 million gallon tank to lots of little 3,000 gallon trucks who are delivering it all throughout Vermont. And to determine how credit ownership based on that, how we've been selling oil for 120 years, is just not going to happen. So in those instances, whether it's a 5% blend or 100% blend, the only way to really ensure that that credit is counted is to leave the credit with the obligated party that is making the capital investment in order to sell a lower carbon fuel. And the customer will make a choice. Will buying a lower carbon fuel, will it be price competitive with fossil? And if it is, then the customer wins by getting a lower cost product, and the environment wins by selling a product with lower carbon emissions. And the one that made the capital investment in their bulk storage plant, in their facility, and their buying practices will have a market opportunity. So I feel strongly that when it comes to delivered renewable fuels, that the credit should not start with the homeowner, because it will be very difficult. And then we've seen that. That's how it is in Massachusetts, as you'll see in the comments that I have yet to post from diversified energy specialists.
Right.
And that works. So
I just want to make, I hear you, Matt. I just want to make sure I understand fully what you're saying. I thought Luce was asking a slightly different question, and I just maybe misunderstood. If the OP, the obligated parties, is now delivering a product that has 5% biofuels, and that's just a part of the product, and everybody who buys that product has 5% biofuels, whether she or he or they, decided to purchase it, they're getting it because it's in the mix. It's just part, like ethanol is in the mix.
Mhm.
I agree with you. It's it seems the credit goes to the OP. There's no question there at all. What happens, or is it even possible? And maybe you're saying no, it's not possible. What happens in the event where where a customer says, I want 10%? Okay, is that possible? Can the customer buy a richer blend in that sense? And then arguably assert that the 5% increase that he has caused really belongs to him. This is where I was, because with Vermont Gas, I see this is not an issue. These are differentiable, but I'm asking if that's what you were asking, Luce, and Matt, if that's what you're responding to.
So, I mean, I'm glad Greg is on here from Vermont Gas, but we buy renewable natural gas. UVM pays a premium. It's been 10 times more than regular natural gas.
Right.
We're buying natural gas, right, for our carbon offsets. It doesn't come in a separate truck.
No, I understand that.
So, I mean, we're paying more for this, and and so why wouldn't we get the credit for it?
Well, but this is, I agree. There's not a question there.
Okay.
I'm differentiating between what's already in the mix.
Right. I agree with you.
And what you cause as a consequence of a decision.
Right. And what's already in the mix, I agree, would go to obligated parties, because you can't, I absolutely agree with that.
It.
But if you're purchasing renewable natural gas and it's not, and you're paying more, allowing them to buy more renewable natural gas, that's the idea.
On your behalf.
On our behalf.
Yeah.
That is the idea, right? I mean, and so it's.
Yeah, in that situation, you would think that instead of paying 10 times more, you'd pay some number less than 10 times.
If they're getting the credit.
And you'd be getting the credit because you're paying less than 10 times, and that credit would flow upstream. And that's why the sort of the vertical integration of that.
Yeah.
I think it almost makes it easier. Plus, they're already regulated.
Right, they're already regulated.
So I don't disagree with that, Luce. I just think that in this other set, you've got a situation where, to point out Rick's initial question, which is, can that occur? Yes. Is it already occurring? Yes. Is that how the vast majority of renewable liquid fuel will be sold in the future? No. This is kind of like one of those custom things. Like, if in tier 3, as some of you know, utilities can have a custom job that shows if you string a line to a sugar house or something like that. That is a custom, versus we're going to get a set amount of credits for installing a heat pump, and they're going to aggregate those, or they can come up with a custom thing. This is kind of akin to that, in which those that say, oh, I want this blend or that blend, would have to work that out. But the vast majority, what will happen is the large wholesalers will invest in the purchasing and the transportation of renewable liquid fuels. The retailers will have a choice: buy from tank A or tank B, and the customers will make that choice, and the dealers will make that choice based on the wholesale decisions. And as long as there's an accounting for that, to make sure that a renewable gallon is counted as such, then I think we achieve the goals of reducing costs for consumers, because it is a competitive marketplace where prices aren't regulated. So consumers might just say, yeah, that's great, that's a renewable gallon. I want to go with the fossil because it's cheaper.
Mhm. Okay,
I get it. I'm just, and I don't have any problem with the fuel dealer getting the credit even for voluntary purchases, so long as there's, as we said a moment ago, transparency in that transaction, and the purchaser knows that what it's purchased has been, the cost of what it's purchased has been offset in some way or another by the credit value. There's been some contractual understanding there. Is that what you're saying, or is there?
I mean, it could go
Or
either way, right? Either you get, the homeowner gets the credit in their hands, or they say, oh, it should have cost me this much more, but they're giving me a reduced rate to buy the
Right.
biofuel. And understanding that it's counting towards the obligated party's credit, you know.
Oh,
I
certainly,
mean,
but
either way, what's best, what do you think will give the best public perception so we can encourage more people to do it? Do you know what I mean? Like,
No,
and
I
is
get
it
that.
money in your pocket? Is that a better perception? But it's more paperwork.
sure, but the question I'm asking, I still don't feel like I fully understand what Matt is saying, and forgive me, Matt, for being
Right.
dense. Is, in the case of delivered fuels, do you feel that voluntary decisions, by end users to increase their uptake of renewable biofuels above what they would otherwise be delivered to them, you still feel that that credit goes straight to the obligated party, and that the homeowner or business has no claim to it, just because of the, or not just because of, but in part because of the difficulties in the accounting? Is that, I'm sorry
Yeah.
to be as dense as I'm
No,
being.
no, that's all right. The way I look at it is, if we're going to move this market, it's not going to be because people raise their hands and say, I want a slightly more renewable product than the one that's being offered to me now. And I don't mean cynical about this, but they're going to ask, what's the cheapest gallon? And who can provide it? And it's the upstream that needs to be. So for instance, if you said to if a fuel dealer said, okay, I am only going to sell a 10% blend. Well, they could ask that of their fuel dealer, and their wholesaler, and their wholesaler would provide that based on their determination of how they can monetize those credits. And if a fuel company comes in and says, there's no way I can get this supply to deliver to those pedal trucks, the retailers that are going to deliver it to consumers, then they're just going to write a check as an alternative compliance payment in lieu of credits, and they will not be able to influence the market, and they will not be able. That's what's going to happen. That's what could happen for propane. And we sell just as many gallons of propane as heating oil in Vermont.
Right.
Heating oil
Right.
has a much shorter path to lower carbon intensity. Propane is already starting at a lower carbon intensity, but acquiring the renewable propane in the quantities that are necessary for the Northeast, it'll be a tougher drive than getting the renewable liquid gallons to be blended in the supply. But there's still a cost involved. That cost will be borne on those that are bringing the fuel in or into Vermont, the obligated parties.
Mhm.
And they're the ones that will need to monetize those credits, not after paying someone a 10% finder's fee for aggregating it amongst consumers. Because remember, they're separate and distinct from the retailers that are delivering the product. It's not vertically integrated. I mean,
Right.
some
Right.
vertically integrated, but the vast majority of fuel, I choose wholesaler 1, 2, or 3, and I deliver to my customers, and they don't know who they are until all that is reported to the registry, and they'll figure it out. But the easiest way to move this market, and I think we should, is to ensure that the credit lies with the entity that brings the fuel in or into Vermont, the obligated party. And that way they can make a financial decision about whether it makes more sense for them to distribute that product, and they will. If they find that with that credit, that they can be competitive or even cheaper than a straight fossil gallon, they'll make that investment, they'll make that commitment, and they'll deliver a more renewable product and lower greenhouse gas emissions. If they say, I can't make that commitment, I can't make that investment, I can't do it, this isn't a mandate. This is the beauty of this. This isn't a mandate. They will then deliver fossil and write a check. And that money will go to weatherization or cold climate heat pumps, or who knows?
And you just don't, and I know I'm harping on this. I hear what you're saying and I get it, Matt. And if I'm going to be drafting a document, I want to make sure I fully understand this. And again, I'm sorry to harping on it, but in effect, you're saying you don't expect fuel oil customers, retail customers, to be many at all, to be making voluntary purchases of cleaner fuel than, because even if they wanted to, they might not be able to get them.
I think that marketers will make a financial decision.
Okay.
If they see an opportunity to sell a gallon that is renewable, and compete with a competitor that compete with their neighbor that is selling a gallon that's not renewable, they absolutely will.
Right, I get you. That's the point that is now beginning to resonate with me. Okay, I think I understand it. I got you.
To be fair to our friends at Vermont Gas, they have a regulatory system that ensures that price, whatever that price that Luce mentioned, that ensures that they can recover their costs.
Right.
Fuel dealer, if they make the voluntary investment in getting a B50 blend, and but the price is so out of whack that their customers don't buy it, then they just turn in the keys and go be a Walmart greeter. I mean, we have real financial decisions to make, and we have to be able to know that if we are making an investment in a renewable energy product, that we have some way to realize that, and not hope that some aggregator then collects all these credits from consumers and then sells them back to us.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
All right. I'm on board with that.
I see it. I'm going to struggle with the language on it, but yeah, I get it. Okay.
So the second point was whether all credits for installed and delivered measures should be awarded directly to customers. So this is very broad, and I think we talked about the buckets in the beginning, but let's just talk about whether all credits for installed measures should be awarded directly to customers. And this is where I think we need to articulate, in my opinion, based on what I've received from Ken and others, regarding the Weatherization Assistance Program.
And I would add tier 3 to this.
In tier 3, yep, in tier 3. So I receive weatherization under tier 3. It's subsidized under tier 3. I receive weatherization that's subsidized or completely paid for by low-income weatherization program because I fit that income criteria. Or I just go out and hire Farnham and insulate my home, and I pay the full freight. Who owns the credits in either of those scenarios? I think I don't know if my mind is made up on that, or at least, but I'm interested in hearing what you think, Greg, about that.
Well, the argument is, I guess the question is, what caused the investment to be made? And that would be, and then you go from there and you say, okay, if the investment is being made as a consequence of the weatherization program or the tier 3 program, then arguably the credit goes to goes to the entity that drove that investment. So one could see credits going to the weatherization program, right, and for resale then to produce more revenues to do more weatherization. That makes total sense to me. I get that. When it's tier 3, and Ken's argument is, correct me if I don't characterize it properly, Ken's argument is that those credits should, because tier 3 is a PUC regulated thing, Okay, that regulated entities are out there doing these things now. Okay, that there should be no essentially windfall financial value to those entities for getting the credits and then selling, but that instead the credits should be piped through to the DDA or some like entity. That there might be
He called it a credit marketing entity was his terminology.
credit marketing entity that, and it could be the DDA, but that then sells them to obligated parties, and the money then again gets recycled into presumably activities of the DDA to, to do what needs to be done to meet the overall targets, right? I mean, that's what the DDA is going to do, right? It's going to fill the gap between what the obligated parties do and what the target is. So I actually find I find Ken's argument in this point actually kind of persuasive. I'm not sure others do, but I do.
So I think you skipped a step. I mean, first of all, I don't think they should be double dipping financially for something that they've already received credit for. But the piece about going straight to the DDA, it's the credit has to be monetized somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't go straight to the DDA. It would, if there's a whole bunch of credits, 11,000 heat pumps have been installed since January 1 of 2023 that were directly incentivized by either Efficiency Vermont or GMP or some other distributed utility. That's what we're talking about, that universe of credits made by non-LMI, non-weatherization, but I installed a piece of equipment, I got a rebate, incentive, EVT or GMP or something else gave me the credit. Should they be able to sell that credit to a obligated party? No, is what Ken is saying.
And that's what I tried to describe. Yes.
Right. So what is happening with that credit, I think, is what Ken's piece, if you read it once I post it, apologize for that, is it just goes into, it essentially buys down those initial credits. We've been given early action credits. We are flooding the market with cheap credits, which are the ones that are already taking, which no one technically has ownership for. I don't know how that will change the market for credits not created under a PUC Tier 3 program. One would surmise that it would have the effect of making it very cheap to comply, and then maybe the obligated parties don't diversify. I'm the two minds here. One is, yeah, it'd be great to have these cheap credits because it won't increase the costs on those that are still continuing to use fossil fuel. But yet, will it have not a perverse, but an effect on the marketplace in which those that want to make that investment in that technology go, I'll just take these cheap credits from short-term thinking, but I'll just take these cheap credits that are just left over from this other program, and I won't bother in hiring electricians or buying a blower doors and weatherization equipment or investing in a capital investment for biodiesel. I don't know. I think that's amongst the possibilities, which is why I understand where Ken's going, but I don't think we can accurately predict, or we can surmise a couple of different directions what happened at the credit marketplace should the market be flooded with essentially cheap credits.
I hear you. I would differentiate then between the early action credits and the ongoing treatment of Tier 3 investments, for example. And I think Ken, at least in my conversations with him, does make that, at least recognize that there are two issues there.
Okay.
So that's
right. No, I see what you're saying. Yep.
Dave.
Hey, Rick. Hey, Matt, and everyone else. Yeah, I was letting the conversation kind of play out on the biofuels, but Ken's memo was invoked, and so I just felt the need to sort of weigh in that on the suggestion that has been advanced. And Matt, it's fine if you haven't submitted it, but I'll explain to the group that there is a memo being circulated that is suggesting that one tag member's opinion is that existing programs should not have a monetary value for the credits that are being developed. I'll just kind of generally characterize it as that. I just want to say that, you know, Efficiency Vermont is not supportive of that proposal. And we think it's contrary to the legislative intent of having all clean heat measures in the state be a part of this market-based solution. We have a host of reasons as to why we think it would create both economic inefficiencies within the marketplace, but also how it would greatly disservice the existing EEU and DU structures for providing, you know, current programs, as well as actually have the opposite effect of increasing the clean heat credit price. And I'd be happy to get into any of that when we talk about Ken's memo, but I just wanted to sort of say, you know, say it for, because it was invoked, that this memo is circulating, but it is not true that it's going to be like universally accepted as the sort of standard moving forward.
Well, no one said that, Dave.
Yeah, no,
The whole point is, of course, to have the conversation. So,
absolutely.
you know,
Can I also raise another question, which is, again, I wanted the biofuel discussion to sort of play itself out, but we filed comments on this to the commission with regard to I can't even remember, either it was the early action or pacing comments. You know, we have some concerns that based on the department's interpretation, and you know, I think they're right, is that the allocation of credits based on the life cycle of the clean heat measure being, you know, disconnected from the state inventory creates a lot of sort of swirl. And so from our perspective, I'm only thinking about this from the wood heat perspective, but wood heat is essentially a zero emission inventory. You know, it has zero emissions in the state inventory. And yet, I think by the law, they're intentionally supposed to be allocated credits based on life cycle emissions. And I have, you know, we have Efficiency Vermont is very confused and concerned about how these two things are supposed to rectify, because to me, that's another form of economic inefficiency where, you know, if the clean heat standard is meant to help meet the state greenhouse gas goals, which is tied to the inventory, and yet it's issuing credits for measures that don't actually reduce the inventoried emissions, then you've got a real inefficiency in the market. And I'm putting that out there because I do think that credit formation and credit ownership, you know, are kind of one and the same. And so that's been on my mind. And if we want to table that for another time, great. I just wanted to say it in this context because I think this is the only committee sort of set up to talk about it.
well, we'll go to Luce in a moment, but that question, of course, has been on many people's minds. This, as you say, the reconciling the life cycle emissions reductions and the inventory effects of certain kinds of fuel. So I hear you, and I don't know how it all shapes up. I don't know if I see it entirely, like personally, as related fully to the ownership question, but I hear you. Luce, you had a question. You had your hand up.
Just a comment, you know, about if somebody decides to install a heat pump and they're not low income, they're moderate income, middle income, and they get a rebate from Efficiency Vermont. It would seem like they should, to get more people to do this, if they get the credits from that, it will encourage more people to do this, is my opinion, right? I mean, they'll get even more. If it goes to Efficiency Vermont, how is that going to encourage everything to continue? I guess it's just a question for Dave. How does that?
Yeah. So happy to talk about that because it's important, Liz. The existing incentives that we have in place today are usually developed or distributed at a midstream level, which means that we're not actually issuing individual incentives to customers. We're usually issuing batches of incentives to the installers themselves. and they will give us a receipt, and they will give us a verifiable list of clean let's do heat pumps as the example, and so we give them the incentives directly, and then they pass those savings on to the customer. That's how it works today. Under the clean heat model, we essentially want to do more of those measures. And so that midstream model starts to break down, because if we are giving $500 for a heat pump, then our budget is only set to do a certain number of those heat pumps at a known volume. And if the clean heat standard is intended to increase that volume, then we would have to either discontinue our incentives when we run out of money, which creates one set of implications, or we reduce our incentive in order to match the expected incentive, the expected volume. And so that means that the clean heat credit would then have to increase in price in order to make up the difference in our reduced incentive. And so that gets really complicated really quickly. And so our preferred approach is that the efficiency utility is allowed to go into a bilateral agreement with the customer to say that if you accept these incentives from Efficiency Vermont via your installer, you are passing those credits along to Efficiency Vermont, who can then sell them to an obligated party, which is the intent of the legislation, is to have all credits in the market be valued.
I just feel like we're adding a middleman, and I'm not sure that's the most efficient way to do it. That's my concern, and that's my concern, because people are putting money out of pocket, right? So I'm just trying to get more people to do it, so there's more incentive in their own pocket.
And I would push back on that's the intent of the legislation, having someone sitting in the chair every single second a period was read. The intent of the legislation was transform the marketplace of the heating fuel dealers and the contractors that are outperforming the work, and provide them access to those incentives, and move those obligations upstream, so that there is no middle person making a DDA wholly unnecessary.
Well, I guess we're not going to solve these problems today. Matt, if I may, it is 11:38, and we're going to be, I think, getting back together in 15 minutes. If we want to hear from other members, other folks on the line, their thoughts, we might want to take this time. But before we do that, this suggests to me, and we don't have to answer this question right here, but this suggests to me that this group has a lot more work to do than perhaps I was optimistic about 35 minutes ago. And that what I would propose, at least, is to begin. You've collated documents. I'm happy to begin roughing out a document that raises these issues and puts them in a form that enables us to focus on them and answer some questions, if we can, over the course of coming breakout sessions. Does that seem like a reasonable outcome of this meeting?
I think so.
Okay.
Is there anyone, Annette, Victoria, Greg, Riley, Justin, anyone that would like to offer, or Henry, offer feedback on anything you've heard, or the straw proposal on credit ownership? Nothing. Oh, Annette. Go ahead.
Why don't you let Justin go first?
Well, no, it's Greg. Greg is next, I think.
Wait, Justin's got to raise his hand. Go ahead, Greg.
Sorry, thanks.
First, Greg.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation you guys are having today and the biofuel stuff. I mean, I think that you're right. We're a regulated entity, and we can kind of sort that out. But I heard a lot of talk about things that will drive the price of credits up or down, or the number of credits this way or that way. But I think it's important to remember that what the really important part is for consumers in general is the total cost of compliance. So, we may do something that causes the market price to go up, but that probably is associated with a reduction in the number of credits, or vice versa, right? You do something that crushes that price because you're flooding the market. Well, then that linkage between the inventory and the compliance level probably is such that we need a ton of credits to meet compliance. So I thought it might be useful to sort of think about at that high level what the obligations are, who owns credits. Those are all mechanisms to achieve the goal in the law, because those total costs are likely to flow to consumers. So the way we can manage that is by pressing those costs down, regardless of the sort of intermediate choices. So that also requires a lot of new money to flow into the space. So it flows into your discussion about what qualifies as tier 3 or what weatherization programs get. So thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Annette?
Yeah, I'll qualify my comments by saying I've been listening at the same time to the Senate Natural Resources Committee's discussion on the renewable energy standard, which is very challenging to listen to two things at once. So I have not taken in everything you've said, but it did remind me that I think that this discussion you're having right now, I think the legislature shouldn't have put this on you all. If they should have said who owns the credit, and that was just something that has come to mind recently. Last night, I attended the first public outreach meeting for the Clean Heat Standard. I think Henry was there. I don't know what word he might use to describe it. I want to be polite, but let's just say that it was not well attended and not well run. But it did kind of clarify something for me, surprisingly. Because they started out by asking the public to talk about credit ownership, except there wasn't any public there. So I realized that the public has no incentive whatsoever on this. And it kind of clarified for me, the obligated parties are the ones that have the incentive. The obligated parties are the ones should own it. And that's my comment.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Annette. Justin, were you still looking for how to raise your hand?
Yeah, well, I can raise it if you like.
No, now you can drop it.
I'm going to make this worse before it gets better, I think, because I think in large part I actually agree with Annette on this one and it's difficult because I look at LCFS programs in other states and other parts of the world, and everything is different to this one. Like, this is very much an outlier in the way it's been structured. But so I say I'm going to make it more difficult before it gets better, because I think we have to be careful. We have measures. We talk about measures and credits, and in my view, a credit, we haven't actually worked out what a credit is yet. What it's worth. And I would argue that multiple measures may actually make up a single credit. How that's dealt with in a lot of other places is in costs, like in the California low carbon program. If you plug an EV in, you can, generate $6 worth of credit, but an actual credit in California can be worth anywhere from $70 to $200, depending on the market. So I think we haven't worked that bit out yet. It gets to how you split up some very small gains and how you bundle them into credits. I think, and I'm going to try and put together something that lays this out more coherently, because this has been a really interesting conversation. But the other thing, I think, it is my view that whoever is managing the credits, the credit market, whatever it is, should not be a participant in that market, because I think it's really important that the market not be seen as an arbitrage opportunity for one participant over others. I think that creates a lot of problems and a lot of risk. So I think I'll just leave it at that right now, but I will work on something that I can actually give you guys that maybe is a bit more coherent. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Justin. I'll take I'll interpret, at least in part, your final comment to me to be that the DDA shouldn't be both managing credits and producing them. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I can read between the lines on occasion. Thank you very much. Any other comments from folks? Henry?
Thanks. Yeah, just to touch on the virtual gathering last night, I would agree with Annette. It was sparsely attended by the public, which was too bad. But I did want to mention one other thing on the topic of credit ownership. These installed measures, I just wanted to flag, and it might be something that's useful for future discussions, that an installed measure in the Act, it provides that that installed measure will generate credits each year going forward into the future of its expected lifetime. So for every year that it relies on a fuel that's lower in carbon emissions than the fuel it replaced, it'll continue to generate credits year on year. So whatever method that is determined to smoothly transition credits or give that option from the customer to an obligated entity or the installer should provide for future years, either spell it out in the contract or just make sure that customers are informed that there are credits in the future being generated that they may be signing away in that single interaction.
Thanks, Henry. That's a good point. In an efficient market, what you would expect in those cases where or what you'd hope for, in those instances where the customer, does have a claim on the credit, you would imagine that an obligated party or someone on behalf of an obligated party would monetize that credit stream, into a present value and have it offset part of the cost of the investment. That'd be one way of handling that. Any other? I'm here. I am. Oh, Victoria Underhill of Irving. Thank you. Please.
Oh, can't hear you, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. I've been observing for so long, I forgot how to use my mic. Yeah, we've been following this along. We provide all our comments into Matt and the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, and I just want to say we have all the confidence that he's got a really good handle on this. Just want to echo our support.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you. And Matt, I don't mean to be running the meeting. It's not.
No, I'm happy to co-share.
I just want to help out. We've got, unless there are no other comments, we've got 7 minutes still, I think, before we get recalled to duty.
Well, can we just define that we have some sort of consensus on installed measures, non-weatherization? Do we?
We may. Do you want to state your understanding of it?
Everything I've seen, and again, I've come around on this, admittedly, because I asserted from the beginning that it should be the installer of the heat pump that gets credit for it. And I've spread the comments and I've thought about it, I've pontificated, and I do think that there is merit to the argument that it starts with actually the consumer, and that there should be a smooth pathway from the consumer upstream to the obligated party. And that may involve the installer acquiring that credit from the homeowner that they have been asked to do that work. And then that installer could be an obligated party, or then could then transfer that credit and they would play the middleman. So instead of some fancy office in Burlington being the arbiter and the middleman, it could actually be the guy that's doing the work with the van that is turning that hustle into cash by discounting their work to the consumer and then selling that to Irving or Global, whoever is obligated in order to get it. Seems to me like a system that could yield merit as long as there was a simple and transparent way that that credit could be transferred for a installed product. But that does not include those that are already incentivized by tier 3, and it doesn't discern the rebate or incentives that a distributed utility or efficiency utility might add. That admittedly complicates it. But I do see a system in which a heating contractor installs a clean heat measure. The consumer initially owns the credit, but realizes the fastest way to monetize that is to hand it over to the person that actually did the work. And then that person did the work, then gives it to, in a transparent way, to an obligated party. Gives it, makes a transaction.
So the answer to your question, do we have consensus? I'll answer, let me give you my response. I think the answer is yes, with the caveat that we're not addressing in this conversation, in this little moment of consensus, we're not saying one way or the other about tier 3 and essentially what Ken is I mean, Dave has just given us he's just told us that VEIC EVT is again it. So without saying anything one way or the other about that, I would agree with you that what you've described, and I'll try to put it on paper correctly. At least I would agree with you on that point. Luce?
It could be interesting. I agree too. It could be interesting because you might be encouraging installers. So we have more installers, which we all know we're so short on installers. So that could be an interesting way to look at things, for sure. So I would be in agreement and certainly still consider that opportunity at this point.
Which, having lived through this for the last 3 years, is the intent of the legislation, to convince installers to do more of this work.
It has to do with workforce too, right? So this is the workforce piece.
Right. Dave, you want to jump in?
Might as well. Yeah, I guess we view things a little differently, I think, than Matt on this. Our view is that the installers follow the market, and that if customers want clean heat measures installed, then they will pay for the project cost to have those installed. And the more people who are interested in having these installations, the more installers will sort of rise to the market need. That to us is the sort of market signal here. And so as a sort of general principle, having the credit sort of reside with the homeowner or business owner who is willing to pay for the installation and have, and I think our comments are kind of exclusive to what we would consider to be like, these capital investment type projects and not a delivered clean heat measure like biofuel. So I just want to clarify that, these are in the context of essentially efficiency measures representing Efficiency Vermont. So yeah, our point of view here is that the point of the legislation is to drive market transformation, which is at its very sort of beginning nucleus, getting customers interested in having something installed. And that will then drive the market for installers to do those installations. I think it's appropriate for the credit to start at the customer premise on that understanding.
Well, then it sounds to me like you're agreeing with what Matt narrowly construed. We're not talking about what happens with tier 3 or something, or weatherization, but it sounds like you agree with what Matt has characterized. Is that correct?
I agree with what the staff straw proposal is suggesting, which is that the credit ownership starts at the customer's premise.
Okay,
And
okay,
then it's up to then bilateral, multilateral
Sure.
agreements and all of that, all of those issues that I think ultimately resides on who is the one selling a credit to an obligated party. So
Right.
credit formation starts at the customer's premise, presumably owned by the customer who owns that premise.
sure. Okay. I think I can faithfully express that.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll do my
And
best.
I think we can envision, based on that premise, that there will be a world in which the thousands of heating equipment installers make a claim to that ability to acquire that credit versus some DDA that's in Burlington that's going to make their claim. We're thousands and thousands of individuals that are in vans in basements doing the work are going to be very loud.
And if they want to not receive an incentive, because any incentive received by the
well, that's the sword of
DEU
Damocles hanging over them, that they
or
can't
the
get money.
exactly. Exactly. So that is fine if they want to retain that credit for themselves and then to sell to an obligated party if the customer is willing to forego it. But they will not get an incentive from a DU. They will not get an incentive from an EEU or a DDA if they do not forego the credit.
But if it's upstream at the supplier, how do you track that?
Well, that's how we track it today. I mean, we have an address for every heat pump and heat pump water heater, and that's how it works today.
Well, Dave, you just said something that, well, boy, we haven't been called back yet, but you just said something that seemed like it was a unilateral statement about what's going to happen. When you said they will not get a credit, I'm assuming
An incentive. They would
Yes.
not get the incentive if they don't hand over the credit. Like
when you say
that,
incentive, in this case, the example being a tier 3 incentive, is that what you're saying?
I don't do tier 3.
Okay.
I do energy efficiency. If you
Well, so,
You-
okay, so the PUC program, the PUC funded, the money, the EVT that comes from electric rates. You're saying that if the installer right now, is it a fact of life right now? Like, I can't be because we don't have any CHS credits out there. But you're saying that it simply will be a fact of life that the installer, in order to get the incentive, just the normal incentive under the EVT programs, must give up the credit. You're saying that, but that hasn't been established yet, has it?
right now, and we've filed comments on this extensively throughout the fall, and had, many discussions with many other folks, as well, as that, yes, right now, our incentive agreement for a contractor to essentially receive a midstream incentive, they are foregoing and passing over all rights to both environmental and energy saving attributes of the projects. So that enables us to claim the greenhouse gas reduction in our efficiency performance portfolio. It also gives us the right to then bid any capacity savings into the forward capacity market. So that incentive agreement is currently in place. If
Really, that agreement was necessary for you to bid into the FCM?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.